There are things a house keeps, not the obvious things, not the good silver or the oil portraits or the deed to the land, but the smaller things, the things that find their way into the backs of drawers and the bottoms of trunks and the locked places that a family agrees, without ever saying so out loud, to stop looking at. Every house has them. The grander the house, the more of them there are, because grand houses have more room for the things that need to be hidden and more people with reasons to hide them. The Reyes house had been keeping its things for 13 years. The candle was nearly gone when she found it. It had started 2 floors below, at a dinner table, with a question that was not a question. Eleanor had not moved when Isabel spoke. She had sat exactly as she had been sitting, back straight, hands still, face composed at its precise, careful temperature. And she had held Isabel's gaze across the candlelight and across the long table and across everything that had been arranged and transacted and buried in this house for the past year. And she had not given the older woman a single thing to read in her face. But underneath the stillness, underneath the composed surface that she had been building and reinforcing every day of the past 2 weeks, something had shifted. Some last internal weight settling into a new position, the way a stone settles into soft ground. And once it settles, you understand it was always going to end up there. It was the understanding that Isabel had just shown her hand. Not all of it. A woman like Isabel did not show all of anything at once, but enough. Enough to know that the weapon she was holding was Eleanor's father's memory, and that she intended to use it, and that the only question remaining was what Eleanor was going to do about that. She had sat with the question suspended in the dining room air. Would you like to have a conversation about how your father planned to settle his debts? For exactly as long as it took to decide that the answer was, not tonight, not here, not in front of Caleb with his frozen smile and his calculating eyes, not without knowing more than she currently knew about the full shape of what Isabel was holding. She had picked up her wine glass. She had set it down. She had looked at Doña Isabel with an expression that was pleasant and level, and gave away nothing at all. And she had said, "That sounds like a conversation better suited to the morning, Doña Isabel, when we're all rested." And she had folded her napkin and excused herself from the table with exactly the right degree of unhurried dignity. And she had walked up the stairs and down the corridor to the room that was hers now, in the way a borrowed coat is yours, covering you, not fitting you. And she had sat on the edge of the carved walnut bed in the lamplight and stared at the floor for a long time, breathing. Downstairs, she had heard Caleb's voice, low and clipped, then Isabel's, smooth and brief, then silence. Then Caleb's boots on the stairs, pausing outside her door. She had felt the pause the way you feel weather, through the walls, and then continuing down the corridor to his own room, and the door closing, and the house going quiet. She had not slept. She had sat at the writing desk and opened her journal and written, by the last of the lamp's light, 3 sentences. She knows more than I thought. She's not done. Neither am I. Then she had closed the journal and blown out the lamp and lain in the dark and listened to the house breathe around her and thought about Thomas 4 miles east in a borrowed room of his own, writing by his own lamp in his own dark. And she had held that thought carefully, the way you carry something across uncertain ground. And eventually, the dark had gone gray, and the gray had gone light, and Thursday had become Friday, and a new day had started without asking her permission, the way days do. Marisol had not slept either. She had been in the library when she heard the dining room door, the particular sound of Eleanor's careful retreat, then the lower sound of her brother's voice, and finally the silence that told her the conversation was over and that nothing good had come of it. Afterward, sitting in the darkness with her knees drawn up in the great leather chair, thinking about her father. Marisol had been thinking about the locked drawer for 3 days. She could not have said exactly when it had begun. It felt as though everything that had happened over the past weeks had slowly shifted old pieces inside her mind, until memories that had stood apart for years were finally beginning to form a single picture. She'd been thinking about what her father had hidden inside that drawer. She'd been thinking about why he had locked it, and why, after his death, Isabel had never allowed it to be opened. Were those 2 reasons the same, or had they become entirely different things over the years? She'd been thinking about her father as well. She'd been 14 when he died. 14 was old enough to love a person with your whole heart, and not old enough to truly know them. That was what the past 3 years had slowly taught her. Her father had not been the man she had once believed him to be. He had not been as strong as she had imagined, but neither had he been as weak. Everyone in the house had always spoken as though Caleb would one day inherit the ranch. Isabel had never made any effort to hide that expectation. To anyone looking in from the outside, it would have seemed that her father wanted the same thing. Marisol knew now that he had not. His trust had rested more often than not with Thomas. His deepest affection had belonged to her. He had always admired Thomas's quiet honesty, and once, so accurately that she had never forgotten it, he had called Marisol the sharpest mind in the family. With Caleb, however, he had never shared that same closeness. There had always been a distance between them, invisible, constant. Looking back now, Marisol felt she understood that distance for the first time. Her father's greatest failure had never been whom he loved most. It had been that he had failed to protect the people he loved. For years, he had watched the order Isabel built around this family. He had understood how, little by little, her decisions had reshaped the lives of everyone beneath this roof. And yet he had never found the courage to stand against her. Perhaps that was why the drawer had remained locked, because sometimes people choose to hide the truths they cannot bear to face, and sometimes a locked drawer weighs more heavily than a man's own conscience. By midnight, she had made her decision. She needed to know the truth. She took her candle from the library and walked toward her father's study. Her father's study was on the ground floor, at the end of the east corridor, past the gun case and the map of the ranch that had hung on the wall since before she was born. The door was not locked. It had never been locked because the study itself was its own kind of boundary, the room that belonged to the man of the house and that everyone in the house had learned over years to approach only when invited. No one had spent much time in it since he died. Isabel used it occasionally. For correspondence she preferred to keep separate from her sitting room. Caleb used it when he wanted the large desk for something. But the room still smelled of her father, leather and pipe smoke and the particular mineral smell of old paper, and Marisol stood in the way with her candle before she made herself go in, because she was 17 and brave and still in certain rooms, young enough to feel the presence of a person who was no longer there. She went in. She crossed to the desk. The locked drawer was the bottom one on the right, the deep one with the brass-fitted lock that she had noticed all her life, in the way you notice things that are consistently present without being consistently explained. She had brought a thin-bladed letter opener from the library, not because she expected it to work on a proper lock, but because she had also, on her way through the kitchen, taken from the ring of household keys that hung on the inside of the pantry door the small brass key that she had seen her father use. On 2 or 3 occasions she could remember clearly, and which had been hanging on that ring for 3 years with no explanation and no one asking for one, because no one wanted to appear to be thinking about it. She had thought about it. She had thought about it for 3 days. She put the key in the lock. It turned. The drawer was not full. That was the first thing she noticed, that it was not full, which somehow made it more significant than if it had been. The way a room with only a few objects in it makes you look at each one more carefully. There were 3 things in it. The first was a leather-bound ledger, smaller than the ranch accounts ledger, with no label on the cover. She set it aside. The second was a folded document with a lawyer's seal that she recognized as the kind of thing her father had kept in the strongbox for legal purposes. She set it on top of the ledger. The third was an envelope. It was yellowed at the edges and soft from handling, the kind of softness that takes years to develop, and it was sealed, and on the front of it was written, in handwriting she recognized as her father's, a single name. Not Eleanor, not Thomas. Not a name she had heard in connection with any of this. A name she knew from somewhere else. A name that belonged, as far as she understood, to a person in Lincoln who had died some years ago. A woman. Someone her mother had mentioned once or twice in the distant past, in the tone she used for people she had known and chosen to stop knowing. Marisol sat very still at her father's desk in the candlelight, and held the envelope in both hands and felt the particular sensation of standing at the edge of something she could not see the bottom of. And she understood, with the sharpest mind in the family clarity that she had inherited and not asked for, that the name on this envelope was connected to everything that had been happening in this house for the past 2 weeks. She opened it. She read it once. Then she read it again, slowly, moving the candle closer. Then she set it down on the desk and put her hands flat on either side of it and looked at the wall above the desk, at the map of the ranch, at the careful lines of the survey boundaries and the creek beds and the fence lines her father had drawn in the margins, and she breathed, in and out, the way you breathe when the world has just changed shape, and your body has not yet caught up with your mind. The candle threw her shadow long and unsteady up the dark wall. Outside the study window, Nebraska was deep in its autumn night, silent and enormous and entirely unconcerned. She'd been sitting there for perhaps 5 minutes when she heard the footstep, not in the corridor, on the porch. The back porch, the kitchen garden side, the porch that was the only outdoor space in this house that felt like relief. She went still. She listened. One footstep, and then another. And then the sound of someone sitting down on the porch bench. And then silence. She knew the weight of those footsteps. She had grown up listening to them. She put the letter back in the envelope, took the envelope and the ledger and the document, closed the drawer, locked it, replaced the key in her pocket, and went out through the kitchen with her candle and opened the back door. Don Rufino sat on the porch bench in his dark coat with his hands on his knees and his silver mustache and his kind, tired eyes that did not look surprised to see her, which told her that he had been here longer than his footsteps suggested and that he had come deliberately, and that whatever she had just found in the drawer was something he had either known about or suspected and had been deciding for some time what to do about. "Don Rufino," she said. "Señorita," he said. She sat beside him on the bench and put the envelope between them and said nothing, because she had found, in the past 2 weeks, that Rufino communicated most honestly in the language of silence and small gestures, and she had decided to trust that language. He looked at the envelope. He looked at the name on the front. Something moved in his face, not surprise, but the expression of a man who has been carrying a weight for a long time and has just seen someone else pick up their end of it. "You know this name?" she said. It was not a question. "I knew her," he said, "a long time ago." He was quiet for a moment. An owl called somewhere in the fields, and the fields gave back their silence. "She was here," he said, "before your father died. She came to this house once when you were very small. You would not remember. Your mother received her in the front parlor and closed the door, and I brought the coffee and I did not hear what was said. But I heard what came after." Marisol waited. "She left before the hour was up," Rufino said. "She did not come back. 3 months later, your father had the locks changed on his study, and this," he touched the edge of the envelope with one finger. "This was never spoken of again." He folded his hands in his lap. "I have wondered, sometimes, what was in that room. I decided it was not my place to find out." He looked at Marisol with his tired eyes. "I think it may be your place," he said. "I think it may be time." Marisol told him everything the letter contained, calmly, clearly, leaving nothing out. Rufino listened without interrupting. More than 60 years of life had taught him that sometimes the greatest kindness a person could offer was simply to listen in silence. When she finished, neither of them spoke for a long while. Somewhere beyond the fields, an owl called into the night. At last, Rufino drew a slow breath. "Thomas needs to know." "Yes, in the morning. I'll have the wagon ready before 6. Marisol nodded, her fingertips still resting on the weathered envelope, tracing its yellowed edges. "Rufino," she asked quietly, "did my father know what my mother truly was?" The old man did not answer at once. "I believe he did," he said at last, "far better than any of us realized." He fell silent for a moment. "I think he understood from the very beginning. But as the years passed, he found it easier to live beside her than to stand against her." His eyes drifted toward the dark window of the study. "And yet, I don't believe his conscience was ever entirely quiet." He nodded toward the envelope. "I think that drawer was the last place his conscience had left to hide." He rose slowly, brushing the dust from his coat. "Try to get some rest, señorita. Tomorrow will ask a great deal of all of us." And for the first time in her 17 years, Marisol understood what it truly meant to carry the weight of the truth alone. Thomas had also not slept. He had lain in the narrow Kellerman bed and looked at the whitewashed ceiling and gone back through everything Aldrich had given him, not the documents themselves. He had memorized those in the way he memorized things that mattered, but the spaces between them. What Aldrich had given him was the shape of the arrangement, the letters, the draft, the confirmed agreement. What Aldrich had not given him, and what Thomas had been lying awake trying to locate, was the mechanism. Isabel was precise. She had been precise about Eleanor, the timing, the correspondence, the delivery. She was precise about everything, and a woman who was that precise did not make a one-time arrangement. She made a system. He had known this about his mother since he was old enough to understand that the world of this house had an architect, and the architect was not his father. He had known it the way you know the weather from the color of the sky, not from analysis, but from long exposure. She had been building something for 30 years, and what she had built was a household that served her purposes and a county that deferred to her name and 2 sons who had been shaped by her particular gravity into instruments of those purposes, one deliberately, one in defiance of it. He was the defiant one, which had cost him a great deal and given him, in the balance, something worth considerably more, the ability to see her clearly. He saw her clearly now, and what he saw was that a woman who had arranged Eleanor's arrival could not have done it with Edmund Hargrove's cooperation alone. Edmund had been the mechanism in Kansas, but the mechanism in Nebraska, the person who had first identified Eleanor's correspondence in the Wichita newspaper, who had brought it to Isabel's attention, who had known enough about Thomas's letters to know that the arrangement was feasible, that person was still unaccounted for. He had been turning this over for 2 days. He had a name, not a certain name, but a probable one, the kind of name that emerges from the negative space of a situation when you look at it long enough. He needed to confirm it, and confirming it meant a conversation he had been putting off, not from reluctance, but from the calculation that the right moment would present itself. By 4 in the morning, he had decided the right moment was now. He dressed in the dark. He wrote a note for old Kellerman, gone to town back by noon, and he saddled his horse in the quiet barn with the smell of hay and horses around him and rode out into the flat pre-dawn dark of the Nebraska plains. The town was 12 miles. He had it by first light. Margaret Olson had been living in the same 2 rooms above the dry goods store for 11 years, ever since her husband had died and left her the choice of the house or the debt, and she had chosen the house and paid the debt and moved somewhere smaller. She was 61 years old, small and precise, with the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have survived a great deal and decided, at some point, to stop fighting the things they cannot change and save their energy for the things they might. She had known the Reyes family for 20 years. She had, at various points over those 20 years, been their seamstress, their occasional correspondent, their intermediary in county matters that benefited from a neutral party, and, in one specific instance that had been buried so thoroughly she had almost convinced herself it had not happened, their instrument. Thomas knocked at 7 in the morning. She answered the door and looked at him and said, "I've been expecting someone. I'm glad it's you." And not her. She made coffee. She sat across from him at her small kitchen table in the early light, and she told him what she knew, which was, it turned out, considerably more than he had been prepared for. She had not read the Wichita newspaper herself. Isabel had sent her a clipping. The clipping was Eleanor's notice, 3 sentences, a woman who worked hard and asked little. Isabel had underlined the name. She had written in the margin, in her precise hand, T's handwriting, "Find out." Margaret had found out. She had written to the newspaper, to the correspondence address in the notice, and confirmed that the woman was in contact with a Thomas Reyes of Nebraska. She had reported this to Isabel. She had not known, she said, not fully, what Isabel intended to do with the information, but she had known enough, she said, and she had not asked, and not asking had been its own kind of knowing. She looked at the coffee in her hands. She said, "I've thought about it many times since, what I should have done." "Yes," Thomas said. He said it without anger, because anger was not what this required. "There's more," she said. She set down the coffee cup. She said, "Eleanor Hargrove is not the first." The kitchen went very still. Thomas looked at her. 14 years ago, she said, there was a woman from Lincoln, a widow. A decent woman, respectable with a small income and a difficult situation and a correspondence with someone in this county who had presented himself under your father's name. She paused. Caleb was 20 then. Isabel had the same concern then that she had now, Caleb's behavior, and the county's growing awareness of it, and the need for a solution that would appear to be natural. She looked at Thomas directly. Her eyes were steady and not unkind. It was arranged the same way. The widow came to the county. She came to the house, and when she realized what had happened, when she met your mother and understood, she did not stay. She went back to Lincoln. Thomas was very still. Her name, he said, Margaret told him. The name was not unfamiliar. It was the name, he realized, of a woman he had heard his mother mention twice in his life, briefly and dismissively, as someone who had been foolish enough to misunderstand a social situation. He had been too young the first time to think about it further. He was not too young now. Is she still in Lincoln? He asked. She was, Margaret said. She died 2 years ago, but she had a daughter. She looked at him. A daughter who would have been born, she said carefully, approximately 9 months after the widow's visit to the Reyes house. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the town was beginning its morning. Wagon wheels on the road below, the smell of someone's bread baking, a dog barking twice and stopping. Thomas sat with what had just been placed in front of him and did what he always did with things that were large and terrible and necessary. He held them steadily and looked at them without flinching and let them be what they were. The daughter's name, he said. Margaret told him that too. He thanked her. He stood. He put on his hat. At the door, he stopped and said, Margaret. She looked at him from her chair. I'm going to need your testimony, he said. When it comes to it, I'm going to need someone who was present, who was asked, who knew. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at her coffee cup. She looked at the window. Yes, she said. I know. He left her there with her coffee and her decision and her 11 years of quiet and rode back toward Kellerman's in the full morning light, the plains wide and gold around him and the sky enormous above, and the shape of what he now knew about his mother, about Caleb, about the woman in Lincoln and the daughter she had left, pressing against the inside of his chest like something that needed to be said aloud before it consumed the person holding it. Eleanor found her footing on Friday morning in the kitchen garden. She had come there because it was the only place in the Reyes property that felt, consistently, like somewhere she could think without the house listening to her think, and she had come early, before the household was fully awake, in her plain dress with her shawl and her practical shoes on the frost-stiff grass, and she had stood at the edge of the herb beds and breathed the cold morning air and tried to decide what she was. She had made one decision already the night before, the decision not to answer Isabel's question until she knew more about the full shape of what Isabel was holding, which was not cowardice but strategy. And she had spent enough of the past 2 weeks reproaching herself for not thinking strategically that she intended to give herself credit for it when she did. But strategy required knowing what you were working with, and what she was working with was a situation in which every adult in this house, except Marisol and Rufino, had known more than she had. Since before she stepped off the train, and the asymmetry of that, the deliberateness of it, was what she could not even now fully absorb. It was not the being deceived that was hardest. She had been deceived before. Most people who had grown up the way she had grown up, by their own resources in difficult circumstances, had been deceived before, and she had learned, over the years, to recognize it afterward and adjust. What was hardest was the precision of it. The way it had been built, piece by piece, by people who had looked at her as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be known, and who had arranged her life with great efficiency and no malice whatsoever, which was almost worse than malice, into the shape that served their purposes. When Marisol appeared at the back door. Marisol looked, Eleanor thought, like a person who had been awake all night and had made a decision about something during the hours of it, and was now carrying that decision with the particular posture of someone who is committed to a weight and is not going to put it down. She came down the back steps and crossed the garden without preamble and stood in front of Eleanor and said, I need to show you something. But first, I need you to understand that what I'm going to show you is going to change things. Eleanor looked at her. Show me, she said. They sat on the back porch steps in the thin morning light, the cold coming up from the frosted ground around them, and Marisol opened the envelope and laid the letter on her knee and waited while Eleanor read it. Eleanor read it once. She read it again. She held it for a moment after the second reading and looked at the fields beyond the garden, at the long, flat Nebraska morning stretching out to the horizon. And she thought about a drawer that had been locked for 3 years, and a name she did not know, and a story that had happened 14 years before she had ever placed a notice in a Wichita newspaper. And she understood, with the cold, clarifying certainty of a person who has just seen the full dimensions of a thing she had only been seeing the edges of, that what had been done to her was not an improvisation. It was a rehearsal of something that had been done before, and the script had already been written, and she had walked into it the way you walk into a dark room and reach for a lamp that isn't where you expected it to be, not because anyone moved it, but because it was never there to begin with. "The woman in Lincoln," she said. Her voice was steady. "She had a daughter." "Yes," Marisol said. Eleanor looked at the letter again. "And your father knew about the daughter." She said it without looking up. Marisol was quiet for a moment. "I think my father knew about a great many things," she said, "that he found it easier to lock in a drawer than to face." Eleanor folded the letter carefully along its creases and handed it back. She sat for a moment with her hands in her lap and the cold morning around her and the weight of everything she now knew settling into its new position, the stone finding the soft ground again, going a little deeper this time. She said, "We need Thomas." "Rufino's bringing the wagon at 6, Marisol said. Eleanor looked at her. At 17, Marisol Reyes had the steady eyes of someone who has decided to be on the right side of a thing regardless of what it costs her, which was, Eleanor had come to understand, the rarest quality in this house and the most valuable. "Thank you," Eleanor said. "Don't thank me yet," Marisol said, which was what she always said, and this time, as before, there was comfort in the consistency of it. Caleb had been in town since before dawn. He had woken in the small hours with the particular wakefulness of a man whose instincts are telling him something his mind has not yet fully articulated. And he had lain in his room for an hour with the ceiling above him and the quiet of the house around him and the specific quality of unease that he had learned, over a lifetime of trusting his instincts, to pay attention to. Something was different. Something had been different since the dinner table, since his mother had made her move, which was not the move he would have made, in the timing or the manner of it. And he had told her so, briefly and clearly, in the exchange she and he had had in the dining room after Eleanor left. And she had listened to him with the expression she wore when she was hearing him and not changing anything because of what she heard, which was an expression he knew very well and did not particularly enjoy. His mother was not wrong about the outcome she was working toward. She was, he had come to understand over 34 years, almost never wrong about outcomes. But she was sometimes wrong about the speed required to reach them. And she was, occasionally wrong about the instruments, and he was concerned that she was being both kinds of wrong simultaneously in this situation, that she was moving too fast and using the wrong lever, because the lever she had chosen was Eleanor's father's memory, and Eleanor was not, as his mother seemed to have concluded, a woman who could be managed through her grief. He had seen enough of Eleanor in the past 2 weeks to know that grief, for her, was not a weakness, but a sharpener. It made her more precise, not less. And precision was the last thing he needed from Eleanor at this particular moment. He had also seen, and this was the thing he had lain awake with, the thing his instincts were turning over, a quality in her face tonight that had not been there before. Not fear, not compliance, something more unsettling. Settledness. She had looked across the candlelight like a woman who had received information that had reorganized something internal, and who was now operating from a different position than the one she had occupied 24 hours earlier. He could not identify the information, he could not identify the source, but he recognized the quality of a person who had decided something, and he intended to find out what she had decided before she had the opportunity to act on it. He went to town to see a man named Pruitt, not Elias Pruitt of Larkspur, a different Pruitt, a cousin, who had moved to Nebraska 8 years ago and established himself in the county's legal and financial circles, and who had, over those 8 years, been useful to the Reyes family in ways that were difficult to categorize and easy to deny. He sat across from this man in the back room of a building that was officially a land surveyor's office, and he told him concisely what he needed. He needed to know if anyone had been asking questions about the family, about the marriage, about anything connected to either. He needed to know if any correspondence had been filed with any court or county office in the past week. And he needed to know. This was the thing he said last with the flat, certain quietness that was his mother's gift to him, whether there was anything in the county's records that connected the Reyes family name to any legal arrangement that had been made before the current situation. Pruitt looked at him for a moment. Then he said he would find out and send word. Caleb thanked him. He rode back to the ranch in the early morning light, past the fields that were his and the fences that were his and the sky that was no one's and would not be. And he thought about Eleanor sitting at his dinner table with that settled quality in her eyes. And he thought about Thomas 4 miles east in a borrowed room. And he thought about his mother and her levers and her timing. And he decided, riding through the morning, that the situation had reached the point where he needed to move first. He just needed to know, before he moved, exactly what he was moving against. Rufino's wagon reached the Kellerman farm a little before 7. Marisol sat beside him on the bench, the envelope and the ledger wrapped in cloth in her lap, her school coat buttoned to the throat against the morning cold. Eleanor sat behind them in the wagon bed on a folded blanket, her shawl pulled close, watching the flat Nebraska country move past in the early light, the frost on the long grass, the sky going from gray to pale gold in the east, the particular quality of a plains morning that was at once desolate and enormous, and, she had found, curiously steadying, as though the scale of the land put the scale of human difficulty into a proportion that was, if not comforting, at least honest. Thomas was in the yard when the wagon came up the track. He had come back from town less than an hour before and had not gone inside, had stood in the cold yard with his hat in his hands and the weight of everything Margaret Olson had told him pressing against his ribs, and he had heard the wagon before he saw it. And when it came around the last bend and he saw who was on it, he felt something move in his chest, relief and something past relief, something that had no ordinary name in the vocabulary of a man who had spent his adult life not expecting anyone to come toward him when things were difficult. He helped Eleanor down from the wagon. Their hands stayed joined for a moment longer than the helping required. Neither of them commented on this. Old Kellerman materialized in the barn doorway with the instinct of a man who recognized the shape of an important conversation and disappeared back inside it. They went into the borrowed room, all 4 of them, which made it very small, and Rufino stood near the door, and Marisol put the wrapped cloth on the table and unwrapped it, and Thomas and Eleanor sat in the 2 chairs and looked at what was inside. Thomas went first. He told them about Margaret Olson, about the Lincoln widow, about the daughter, about the name. He told it plainly and in sequence, in the manner that was the only manner available to him for things that mattered, and Marisol listened with her jaw set, and Rufino listened with his eyes closed, and Eleanor listened with both hands flat on the table and her face doing its work, holding everything at its careful temperature, absorbing without flinching. When he finished, Marisol laid the letter on the table. She said, "Read this." Thomas read it. Eleanor watched his face while he read it, watched the steadiness of it, the specific way it received difficult information without crumpling, which was the thing she had known from the handwriting and was finding in the face to be precisely as it had seemed. He set the letter down. He looked at Marisol, and she looked at him, and they looked at each other with the particular recognition of 2 people who have loved the same family and come to the same conclusion about it and are now on the same side of the conclusion for the first time. "So it happened before," he said, "to a woman in Lincoln, and the daughter is living," Marisol said. "Presumably." She looked at her hands. "Which means Caleb has a child in Lincoln who does not know who her father is." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Does Mother know?" "I think," Marisol said, "that Mother has always known. I think the drawer existed because Father knew and could not face knowing, and so he locked it away and gave the key to no one and hoped it would remain unasked." She looked at Thomas. "I think it is the reason Mother tolerated Father's behavior for 30 years, because he knew something she needed him not to say." Rufino opened his eyes. He said quietly, "There is also the ledger." They looked at him. He nodded at the cloth-wrapped items on the table, the ledger which none of them had yet opened. "Your father kept accounts," Rufino said, "that were not the ranch accounts. I have seen him writing in a ledger that size on 3 occasions. Each time he locked it in the drawer when he was done. Each time he did not know I saw. He looked at Marisol. It is worth knowing what is in it before you decide what to do with what you know. Marisol opened the ledger. The handwriting was her father's, the same careful, formal hand she recognized from the estate documents and the letters to the bank. The columns were not standard ranch accounts. The entries were dated, coded, and the figures beside them were not cattle prices. She turned the pages slowly, Eleanor beside her reading as she went, Thomas leaning over her shoulder. What they were looking at, they understood gradually, and then all at once, was 30 years of a different kind of accounting. Not money, not exactly, favors and debts, and the names of people in the county who had received something from the Reyes family and the dates on which they had received it, and the implicit understanding recorded in the coded shorthand of a man who needed to remember but did not want anyone else to read of what had been given in exchange. The priest's name was in it, the lawyer's, the sheriff's, and at the bottom of the last filled page, dated 3 years ago, 2 weeks before he died, in the shaky hand of a man who was already not well. M.O. Arranged. T's letters, I directed. God forgive me. M.O. Margaret Olson. The room was very quiet. Eleanor looked at Thomas. Thomas looked at the ledger. Marisol sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. Rufino said nothing at all. It was Eleanor who spoke first. She said, "He knew." She said it quietly, without heat. He arranged it. He helped her arrange it. He was not a man who was tricked into something by a stronger person. He chose this. She was not, Thomas understood, speaking of Caleb. She was speaking of his father. And Marisol understood it too, and did not look away from it, because she had made her decision on the back porch in the dark the night before, and she was not going to unmake it now. Yes, Thomas said. He chose it. Eleanor nodded once. She looked at the letter and the ledger and the ledger's last entry, and she thought about her own father, about Edmund Hargrove's careful letter to Isabel, about the bank draft, about the choices a man made when he had run out of road and did not know himself well enough to find a different direction. She thought about what Otis had told her once on a porch step in Kansas, spitting to the side and working a stem of grass between his teeth. Fighting and losing ain't the same as not fighting at all. She thought about what she had written in her journal on the first night in this house. I do not know how to name what is wrong. She knew now. She had known for several days. Naming it had not, as she had once feared it might, made it larger. It had made it, strangely, more manageable, the way a storm is more manageable when you can see its edges. We have the letter, she said. We have the ledger. We have Margaret Olson, who arranged the correspondence and can testify to it. She looked at Thomas. And we have a daughter in Lincoln who does not know who her father is, and who may, when she learns, have a great deal to say about it. Thomas looked at her. Abbott said 2 years for a divorce case, he said. Abbott said 2 years without what we have now, Eleanor said. She held Thomas's gaze across the small table, in the borrowed room, in the early morning light, and what passed between them was not optimism exactly. It was something quieter and more durable than optimism. It was the specific quality of two people who have looked at a problem clearly and decided, without sentimentality and without pretense, to solve it together. It will not be easy, she said. No, he said. And it will take longer than we want it to. Yes. And Isabel will fight every part of it. She will. He was quiet for a moment. Are you ready for that? Eleanor thought about the portrait in the drawer, about the locked study and the letter with the stranger's name and the ledger with its 30 years of favors and debts, about a woman in Lincoln and a daughter who did not know, and a man in Kansas who had written first and accepted a bank draft and told himself a story he had needed to be true. She thought about all of that, and she thought about what she was and about what she intended to be. She said, I have been ready for something like this my entire life. I simply did not know what shape it would take. Thomas looked at her for a long moment. Then, very carefully, in the lamplight of the borrowed room with Marisol watching and Rufino at the door, he picked up her hand from the table and held it and did not let go. Outside, the Nebraska morning was fully arrived. Gold and cold and enormous, the sky wide above the flat country, the frost beginning, at last, to lift from the grass. They had work to do, all four of them. And the work was, for the first time since the train had pulled into the station 11 days ago, their own. It was Rufino who said it was time to go back. He said it with the timing of a man who understands exactly how long a thing can last before the world intrudes on it. And they all understood he was right. Eleanor and Marisol went with him to the wagon. Thomas walked Eleanor to the wagon step, and he held her hand until the step required both of hers, and he said quietly, so only she could hear, "I'll write to Abbott today, and to Lincoln." She nodded. She looked at him from the wagon step, at the green eyes and the morning light on his face, and the specific quality of him that she had known from the handwriting and had found, in the face, to be exactly and entirely what it had seemed. She said, "Be careful," he said. "You too." The wagon moved. She watched him standing in the yard of the Kellerman farm until the track bent and the cottonwoods took him from sight, and then she turned forward and looked at the road ahead, and she thought about what was waiting at the end of it, the house and Caleb and Isabel and the long table and the candlelight and all the careful performances that lay between now and the day the ground of this arrangement finally, irreversibly, gave way under the weight of what had been built on it. She was not afraid. She was, she found, something considerably more useful than unafraid. She was clear. The wagon went on through the gold Nebraska morning. The frost lifted from the grass. The sky held everything, the house and the farm and the road between them and the four people on it, with the vast, impartial steadiness of a sky that has held a great many difficult things and will hold a great many more, and is not altered by any of them, and goes on. Caleb was in the yard when the wagon came back through the gate. He was standing near the barn with his arms loosely crossed and his hat on, in the posture he adopted when he had been waiting for something and intended the person arriving to understand that the waiting had been noted. He watched the wagon come in, Rufino on the bench, Marisol beside him, Eleanor in the bed, and his blue eyes moved across all three of them with the slow, deliberate inventory of a man who is reading a situation and has decided to let the situation know he is reading it. He did not move toward the wagon. He did not speak until Eleanor had climbed down and smoothed her skirt and stood in the yard with the morning light on her face. Then he said, "Early morning for an errand." He said it pleasantly. The pleasantness had nothing in it. Marisol wanted company, Eleanor said. Her voice was level. Her hands were at her sides, easy and still. Caleb looked at Marisol, who met his gaze with the expression of a girl who has decided not to be, afraid of this particular look, and is still in the early practice of not being afraid of it, but is making a creditable effort. "Company," he said. He looked back at Eleanor. His eyes moved once, briefly, to the cloth-wrapped parcel under Marisol's arm, just once, quickly, the way a man's eyes move when he has registered something and is deciding not to show that he has registered it. Eleanor saw it. Rufino saw it. Marisol, to her credit, did not look down at the parcel, but kept her eyes on her brother. "It's a cold morning for riding out," Caleb said. "Yes," Eleanor said. "The cold is easier than the house sometimes." Caleb said nothing for several seconds. The familiar warmth slowly disappeared from his smile. "The next time," he said quietly, "you leave this ranch, you'll do it with my permission." The yard fell silent. Eleanor met his gaze. There was not the slightest trace of fear in her voice. "I am not your servant, Caleb." Caleb took one deliberate step toward her. "No." His voice dropped, colder now. "You're my wife." He paused. "The law may not yet recognize what was begun before men, but the vows we made before God were spoken long ago. And you are my wife, and as my wife, you will obey me." Eleanor never looked away. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. They simply held each other's gaze. At last, Caleb stepped back. The familiar, measured smile slowly returned to his face. "I'll see you at breakfast." He turned and walked toward the barn. Without another word, Eleanor climbed the steps and disappeared into the house. She never looked back. Caleb did not know the truth, but he knew something had changed, and the most dangerous Caleb Reyes had ever been was the moment he began to suspect. Thank you for spending time with me today. If this story touched you about the things families lock in drawers and the cost of the choices we make for people who never asked to be chosen for, I hope you'll join me again. A ledger has been found, and a letter, and a name that belongs to a child in Lincoln who does not yet know whose child she is. Caleb has seen something he was never meant to see. Consider subscribing so you don't miss what happens next. Until then, keep the light on the porch.